And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, November 17th, 2021. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in NPM RFC issue 494, which I'll copy and paste for folks. If you're just joining, I've spammed this a few times, but the meeting notes link is in the chat. Feel free to add yourselves as an attendee there. And I'll be taking notes as we discuss the agenda items. Quick code of conduct acknowledgement. We do ask that folks please be polite, and on these calls, if you can, as others are speaking, just be mindful and raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and we'll call on you. Appreciate everybody just being kind to each other and thoughtful on these calls, as well as all the RFC issues themselves and PRs themselves. I wanted to quickly give some space for folks if they have any announcements they'd like to share. Feel free to voice them now. If not, we can jump right in. I sorted the agenda a little bit differently than it was generated initially, so I apologize if folks saw this shift a bit since I generated it this morning. The first item that's actually on here is item 493. So this is new from last week. I believe, Caleb, you put this together. It's NPM, adding NPM copy to the CLI. Did you want to speak a bit to this?
Sure. I wrote this RFC after reading another RFC in the queue, which is about multi-app repository support, workspace support, and also after experimenting with workspaces myself. I found that it was hard to create a deployable bundle from a package if you have workspaces, because packing with bundle dependencies doesn't include dependencies that are hoisted above the package level. So npm copy is possibly a new command that would be included in npm, which copies the pack list files and production dependencies of a workspace package or packages in a workspace into a new directory. So you could then zip it to deploy to Lambda or another deployment system. You could copy it into a Docker container. I have a test implementation. I'm not that familiar with Arborist, so I'm sure there's some bugs there. I'm curious if people think this is worth including in NPM, or if anyone who needs to create a production deployment should just use a bundler like ESBuild or Webpack, or if this should be its own command, because there's no really strong reason for it to be included in NPM other than I think that it covers some of the deficiencies for creating and installing production copies of modules.
Yeah, I think we've had previous discussion in this space. I think there might have been historical RFCs that actually like people have spun up. I could be wrong. I'd have to go digging, but I'm not sure if other folks have context there. Maybe Isaac or Matt, I see you also want to chime in.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the multi-app workspaces support thing is mine, I think. And what came out of that discussion was sort of two RFCs, one of which is to prepare scripts on linked bundled dependencies. So in a sort of multi-app monorepo or a workspace monorepo, a multi-app workspace, whatever, you say that sort of app A depends on package B via the sort of file path specifier, and then also list it as a bundled dependency. And then when both of those things are true, running npm install inside of package, so instead of app A, would build and copy package B into your local node modules. That sort of like local node modules part is sort of part of another RFC, which I think is still being worked on. And Jordan, I believe, was going to take that over, which was more about kind of like how npm installs tree layout works in a workspaces monorepo. but I'm A plus on board with the use case.
Can you link the shared layout RFC? I don't think I saw that one.
It's not written yet. It is something I'll be writing this month.
Isaac, did you want to go?
Yeah, so on the shared layout thing, I was just going to say what Jordan just said, but there is sort of a, I don't know, primordial form of the shared layout RFC, which is written. And that's just basically suggesting that we do not hoist anything up above the workspace level. So other than peer dependencies and dependencies on sibling workspaces. If we were to do that, that would obviously lead to more duplication in some cases. If two things share a direct, production or dev dependency, it's not going to get hoisted and shared. But we can say, all right, well, solve that with isolated mode, which is going to give you the same, maximal level of deduplication there with symlinks. Second, I think in order to really make it satisfy this use case, the npm copy use case that Cal was bringing up here, we would need to do sort of the next step of that, which was Jordan's suggestion, where anything that is shared between workspaces, dependencies on sibling workspaces or peer dependencies, not only we don't hoist them, instead we put them in some hidden location like node modules /.npm/workspace shared, and then symlink those packages from there so that they are hoisted in a sense, but they're still not accessible to the top level dependency, and they're explicitly linked into the workspaces. If we do that, then npm pack should still just do the right thing, because everything that's a dependency of that workspace will either be a symlinked dependency or a something that's in its own node modules folder. So in that case, I think it would actually give us exactly what we need in terms of making npm pack just work out of the box without an additional command. So that would be kind of an argument against this particular RFC that we're talking about. But I think the use case it's one that's been brought up several times, and so it's kind of just been a little challenging to figure out like what's the best and least breaking way to satisfy that use case in a way that's sort of going to make things behave in an expected way.
I listed fixing npm pack with regards to workspaces and bundle dependencies as an alternative to npm copy. I think it still has a couple of weaknesses that npm copy improves on, but I'm not sure if it's a strong enough argument for adding a new command.
Maybe you could, excuse me, maybe you could sort of share what those additional weaknesses would be, or kind of what else it would add.
So one of the weaknesses is that parsing npm pack's output to determine what tarball file you would need to extract. So for my use cases, I'm not interested in having a tarball file. I either want a zip file to upload to Lambda or a directory layout. So I have to run pack and then find the tarball that was created and then extract it, which it's not terrible, but it's not aesthetic. Another issue is with npm copy, it's designed so that you can list a number of workspace packages to include, while npm pack packages each workspace package individually. So if you needed to include like 2 top level packages, you would end up with lots of duplication. Maybe it's in some lengths, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how pack would include them. Like, I think pack would end up dereferencing all of the symlinks, and if you had to package 2 or 3 workspace dependencies, you would have copies of each of the shared dependencies.
Yeah, you would, because you'd have a tarball per workspace.
Yeah, and then finally, npm pack would require you to use bundle dependencies. And this is a total straw man, but I imagine there's a case where you might want to deploy an application yourself, but also publish your package without bundle dependencies to a registry.
I see.
These are listed in the RFC.
I am tipping my hand that I have not read it. I'm sorry.
I mentioned that because I noticed that somebody was typing out these comments in the meeting notes.
Yeah, I just put a reference to the actual rendered RFC there in chat as well for folks that are watching it. But yeah.
Right. So I think this is maybe better to zoom in on then. Like let's, you know, leaving aside the, like, we should fix the tree layout in a way that will make npm pack behave reasonably for what it is. I think that's totally, I think somewhat orthogonal to this npm copy command, or, you know, spelling TBD.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There's still use cases for publishing with bundle dependencies, and I think they're currently broken with the given.
Right. Unless you jump through a bunch of hoops to, like, you know, manually copy them in, which is not ideal. The use case that I'm hearing here then is essentially you need a folder structure which has the kind of like fully realized package tree of one or more packages, referenced maybe as workspaces or as folders or just as, you know, name it version, and so that you can kind of like zip that up and send it somewhere.
Yep. Into a Docker image.
Right. So yeah, send to Lambda, copy to Docker, do whatever. That's a thing that wouldn't be super hard to do. I think we just kind of need to figure out the ergonomics of it. You know, kind of the command shape and arguments and what have you.
I have a working implementation, but there's probably a lot of work for arguments and all that jazz. It's linked in the RFC.
So I'm just grabbing that link actually.
It's in chat. There we go.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Caleb. Anybody opposed to like the strategy of implementing a new command? Other than the fact that we should probably fix publish either way for bundle depths.
The other question I'd have is this applying to workspaces only? Because it looks like it doesn't need to, but it seems like it's phrased like it is.
So I've phrased it focused on workspaces because npm pack and then extracting works pretty well without workspaces. The test implementation works with or without workspaces. There's just less of an argument to create this new command if you're not considering workspaces.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're not going to make a command that just works with workspaces and doesn't work. Like someone will come across this at some point and want to use it for something, even if it's not the best approach. So I just want to make sure that it still works.
Yeah.
So
I
it
think
does.
that
It's great.
the ergonomics that need to be reviewed are which dependencies are included by default. So if you're in a workspace, should root dependencies be included? Should root files be included? If you're not in a workspace, it's much simpler. Obviously, all the dependencies, all of the included files should be included. There's also some issues that I haven't documented. I'll add them to the RFC, but the current implementation doesn't run any scripts. It doesn't run prepare, and it doesn't run post install stuff, which it should probably run post install for the package itself, because those files would already be on the exclude list and wouldn't be copied by pack list. So there's some complicated things that need to get worked out.
Yeah, you might actually, it might be worthwhile even sort of approaching it something like a global install to a predefined folder, right? But with a little bit more of a affordance for including one or more workspaces within your project, right? Because that's kind of what you want it to be. You want to get like as if this had been installed, so that you can drop it into either a node modules folder or a global space or whatever, like on your Docker image.
Yeah, I've also tried using npm install global, but the main problem there is that it doesn't. So npm install global also has problems with pack and with referencing dependencies that are in the workspace but aren't published.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just copy your node modules directory, so it's a little bit inefficient.
Is the reference implementation just like you said? It's completely standalone today, Caleb. It's not actually like a forked version of Arborist yet, or
it's a forked version of npm. I added it. I've written it as a standalone script, but in this case, I added it as a in npm. It's an npm command.
Cool. So it's something that we could actually look at in a PR form if you want to actually move forward with that.
Yeah, I think that I created it as a draft PR in my own repository, but I'm happy to create it as a draft in the npm repository.
Cool. It might be interesting just to like give visibility into like that, and get like people actually using it. Would you be okay with opening up a PR between now and next week, maybe? And cool.
I haven't written any text because I didn't want you guys to just reject it. On that.
Cool. Yeah, I don't think that it sounds like there's like any strong arguments against this. So long as it's like clearly documented, given the fact that like copy is such a I don't know, it's sort of very vague in terms of maybe what it's actually like, what you're actually doing.
I'm happy to bite shed any alternate names.
Yeah, I don't have a like ready suggestion that I would put forward as better than copy, but I kind of also feel like it's a little vague. So apologies for the unhelpful negative feedback, but yeah, that's something we can kind of
Seems like a
right on a bit.
Publish dry run move, like I don't know, like like or pack dry run, yeah, I don't know.
npm layout, npm dump into a folder. I don't know.
Yeah,
All of the alternate names really beg the question, why aren't we just fixing pack or fixing install, or why isn't this an extra flag for one of those commands? Which maybe it could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we mess with the implementation and kind of like comb through the edge cases and then iterate on the command name, it's entirely possible we just land somewhere like that. Like maybe pack should just have an option that says dump it to a folder, or pack should be able to take multiple arguments and give you one tarball that has all of them. And then it's a matter of just, tarx $, npm pack ABCDE. But any changes to npm pack, I would kind of worry would be challenging because it doesn't currently give you a way to pack multiple things into a single tarball. If you give it multiple things, you get multiple tarballs, and anybody who's relying on that will run into issues if we change it, which we could in a Semper Major if we decide that's more sensible. But
it's also a strawman use case. It's something that copy, as I implemented it, supports, but I guess I can think of a couple times that you might want to create a single directory or archive that includes a couple different workspace packages at a top level. Like maybe you want one archive that you're going to use in multiple lambdas that use different handlers, but I'm not sure that that's necessary.
I have definitely run into this in test cases, but I'm also one of a half dozen or so people who regularly run tests that involve npm packing things and package trees and folders and such. So that may also be sort of a very niche use case.
Cool.
I mean, if we fix npm pack and then find that it actually just does satisfy this use case, then that's fine. Maybe that's where we land with it. But I can imagine that there's some, even if it's just a flag to npm pack that says put it in a directory, that might be worthwhile. Also, the case you bring up about bundle dependencies, I think makes a ton of sense, because npm pack really should be like, this is the archive, this is the artifact that we're going to be publishing, that's like the installable artifact. And what you're looking for here is more like, yes, create that installable artifact, but then actually install it in this folder so it has all of its steps and everything, bundled or not. And that is definitely different from what npm pack is kind of designed to do. Because you're not trying to create a package, you're trying to create a package tree that's fully resolved.
Okay, Jordan, I see your hands up, and then I'd like to time box this so we can keep going.
Yeah, so I see in the RFC post that there's -- production. Obviously, it makes sense that it should mirror the way those flags work with every other npm command. Is there any use case where you would not want to do only production? Or is like every use case for this involve stripping dev deps?
I think so.
Okay.
I left production and omit the way that they were. Like even the documentation for npm prune is like, why would you run prune without passing production? So whatever documentation we write for that would mirror it. But I'm happy with default, with production being the default.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily suggesting a default change or a capability limit. I'm just trying to make sure I understand if in fact because that might help the naming discussion as well. But yeah, it seems like a good feature, whether it's through pack or not.
Cool, thanks.
If folks have any other feedback, feel free to add to the RFC itself. We'll keep it open until we actually have any kind of resolution there. And appreciate if you can maybe try to open up a PR, Caleb, or we can discuss even async in other channels, Slack channels, etc. Sort of the implementation. Moving on to your other RFC, the resolved registry overrides 486. I'm not sure if there's been any updates here since we discussed this, I think last week or a couple of weeks back.
I've started an implementation and I have something that worked, but it doesn't have any options, so it's not configurable. I would appreciate some help, like advice on how to wire up options, because it's currently in a static method in Arborist. It doesn't have access to all of the npm command flags. And if we were to enable this, it'd have to be with some either Boolean or replacement option. That can all be async. We don't need to talk about that here.
Cool. We can get someone potentially to pair with you. So if you've got time over the next week or two, let's see if we can get like a call set up or even async, give you some guidance on where to look.
What's a good place for async communication?
So we have a few Slack channels that I've sent. I think historically I sent Matt a whole list. I'll add them to the actual RFC docs so you know which channels we are in. But the OpenJS Foundation Slack channel has an npm, or Slack organization has a channel. The Node Tooling working group also has a Slack org that we have a channel in. And then the third sort of Slack async place we hang out is the Node.js, former Node Foundation org Slack that we have an npm channel. And so those three are great places to poke any of the core team.
Okay, I introduced myself on OpenJS. On there.
Cool. So we can circle back then in that. The action. Moving on to RFC 488. So this is the npm install scripts, turning npm install scripts to be opt-in. Francesco, I know you're here. Did you want to maybe speak to any updates that you've got in the last week or so? I know we were talking about telemetry and getting some more data as well.
Yeah, and also just want to highlight Peter's here too. He's actually been doing a lot of the actual datification, so I might hand off to him. But just to give just a very high level overview, we got like the very basics of the data we wanted to get, which is just like, hey, this is how many packages currently rely on some version of this, including kind of the more subtle ones like the zip file stuff, how that compares to total numbers, and if you're interested, like specifically, well, how many people are using install scripts versus relying on the auto detection of the zip file, that sort of thing. And it's pretty much matches kind of the last time we did something like this, which was like I think over a year ago, which is from a package perspective, and I always have to kind of like make this distinction, right? Because there's different concepts of package, right? There's like versions versus like packages. And it becomes kind of complicated to like fully understand the full scope. But I think that this is kind of the easiest way to kind of look at the landscape. It's around 0.6% of packages. And the kind of purpose of this metric, at least in our perspective, is like, from like a worst case scenario, let's say we had to go and, you know, change every single one or something, what would that require? And it seems to be around 12,000 packages, which at least in my mind starts to kind of like get kind of close to human scale, right? Like, oh, let's just email everybody who uses it. Let's see if they have an issue. Like, you know, it's certainly within the kind of scale that we can now take the next step, which is what we're, I think, actively crunching on. And Peter, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like cross-referencing that to like, you know, download counts and so forth, which to get a rough idea of like how of these 12,000, what is a representation of how people are using it. And hopefully, you know, when we compare to download counts, just, you know, since it's not like 100,000 packages, since it is like 12,000, and since in theory, it's going to kind of look like a long tail download count wise, we're just going to kind of manually go through and start looking at these things and seeing whether kind of some of our intuitions match up with the actual use cases of like, well, we think a lot of people are using it to either display a message or to do some sort of, you know, fancy compilation or whatever, such that hopefully the next time we update the RFC, it's going to be like, okay, well, here's the raw numbers, how many people are using it. Here's hopefully an okay understanding of how people are using it, right? Which will ideally inform the discussion a little more of like, you know, if we go through and like, we look at 100 packages and all of them use it for like a completely unique thing that would require just, you know, adding 100 features to NPM, then that's, you know, would clearly give us some pause, as opposed to like, if we go through and of the first 100, it's like, well, they kind of fall into two big buckets. Maybe like, let's contact these package authors, ask them how they would, you know, envision like this being handled automatically by NPM, et cetera. So I also have started kind of, there's just a lot of information that's lost as answers within that thread, trying to bring that into the RFC in a way that doesn't sound like I'm answering a question that isn't present, right? Because you have to kind of change the grammar a little. So specifically kind of just making the scope clear, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're not trying to accomplish, kind of defining some of the scenarios. And again, things that I think, you know, depending on where you're coming from your background in programming, you may, you know, not realize that like, oh, maybe there's Ruby people using this or not, et cetera. Basically trying to just get all that information into the RFC so that like there's, you know, you don't have to read through like 30 comments. But that's more or less where we're at now. I don't know, Peter, if you want to add anything, but I think that I covered it, at least from my end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One note.
I think that answers. Sorry, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I saw Bradley, your hand was up, and then I apologize if that was from before. And then Peter, would love to have you top up on.
Sure. I just wanted to figure out, knowing the number of packages that define scripts is good, but we need some way of measuring how that impacts the overall ecosystem. So something like total number of transitive dependents on these packages, which is probably going to be a much more concerning number, because if you break up dependency of those, it breaks effectively that package, even though it is not having scripts itself. There are a bunch of packages, like the Datadog package I mentioned last time, that don't actually need the script in order to function. So that should be taken into account. But I suspect at least a few of those are going to have really high download counts, and then a bunch of them are not going to have so high of download counts. And so the practicality of 12,000 packages migrating, I am very skeptical of after being part of the NPM, the ESM migration on NPM, and watching kind of the responses by various maintainers, some of which are not so eager to support people outside their specific use case. So that's all.
So apologies, Francisco and Peter, and then I guess Miles.
Sorry, I did see the comment that you left. I just forgot to address it. So we know how to calculate that number. It's at least it's non-trivial in description, or it's trivial in concept, but it's non-trivial like computationally to figure out kind of like, the adjacency matrix of every package to every package to see if there's kind of like any eventual connection. The kind of thinking on our part was, so for example, just to use the two hypotheticals, if every single package had an install script, then we'd know it'd be really hard and probably you need to think of a different thing. If one package used an install script, then we know like, oh, let's just convince this one person and then we'd be okay. So the kind of idea behind this 12,000 number was just basically like, that seems like the kind of thing where we can at least start sniffing around and seeing like what like the easiness or difficulty is. We're certainly going to look into this adjacency matrix stuff. Again, as far as I know, the best way to do it, and unfortunately, like, you're just going to go open up every package JSON. You're going to read every dependency of everything, right? You have a 2 million by 2 million matrix. You put a little 1 every time there's a connection. Then you raise that to the 2 millionth power, and then the resulting matrix, anything that's not 0 has a transitive dependency, and then you go and count those. Easier said than done, just from the perspective of like, you're either going to be running npm info to get dependencies, or you're going to be untarring to like grab the dependencies from package JSON, et cetera, all that before actually creating the matrix and doing the matrix math. So we're going to see like how reasonable that is. Like, obviously we're not doing it by hand, the computer has to do it, right? So like, it might be relatively trivial.
I can do it. We've done
yeah, I mean,
the Node project has done it before, so we can do it again.
Like if there's like an existing thing, we'd love to just have that info.
The incoming database is slightly out of date. We can try a new poll, but that'll take like a week overall to get it done. So that's a good timeline.
Cool. And then I guess the question I had kind of in relation to all this data stuff is like, the more, this is something we've dealt with internally too, the more we like start thinking about this problem, the more it's like, oh, it would be really nice if we could, query the genie for this information on the packages. It would be interesting, like ahead of time, to know like what data is meaningful from the perspective of like, what moves the needle, right? Like if ahead of time we're like, well, if the transitive dependencies are around this number, then that would be a definite no. Or if it was around this number, it would almost be like an easy yes, as opposed to kind of, and again, something that everyone can get stuck on a lot, just the trap of like, there's always another question to ask, which is kind of why we're falling more towards the like, what would it look like to implement some of these solutions, and like, essentially reaching out to some of these package authors and answering precisely, I think your very good point of like, well, if they come back with like, what's in it for me or something, then it's like, okay, well, maybe that's not the best approach, as opposed to like, if we go and we see that there's some couple of big buckets, we reach out to them, we try to pitch it as like, actually, this makes your life easier. You don't have to update your scripts anymore, blah, blah, blah. And we get a positive reception, having that be kind of like a positive indicator as to, I guess, starting to make some code progress. Because something that we mentioned, I think, last meeting too, is I think in an ideal world, we begin to put some of these features into NPM prior to any sort of big switch, right? Like whether that's like, hey, we've made something easier, you can choose to use it, right? Nothing scary, we're not gonna take your scripts away yet or anything. And then even in between that and some big switch, just having the option of saying, hey, I'm running NPM without scripts and only enabling things, but that's something that you turn on. And if that starts to look really good, the final step being like, hey, we're now feeling pretty comfortable that most people either understand this feature set and know like the special cases, or aren't using it or aren't relying on it as much, we can kind of start to experiment on making some defaults changes, if that makes sense.
Peter, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have that much to add, but I definitely am interested in hearing if there's any specific data like what Bradley said. Any sort of metrics that would help make this decision easier. And frankly, if there's, I think if we kind of establish what the criteria should be prior to getting the metrics, it would help us, like, I think, make this decision in a less sort of emotional way. But I'm totally, yeah, I'm basically all ears for any sort of data that would help.
Just on the data point, there's an existing tool, Jazimnid, by the Node Foundation, that you can use to grab all the package metadata and do things like source code grepping.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really awesome, and I think that's in addition to the npm endpoint that that ZV is talking about in the chat.
It's separate. So Jazimnid downloads everything to a local database.
Oh, I see it now.
It's an out of date version published as well.
Cool. That's excellent. Thank you.
Miles, did you want to go? And then
yeah,
go.
a couple different things. One, I don't know the best way to do this, but I do remember when I used to work at Google, you could query GitHub data on BigQuery. I'm not sure how out of date or if out of date that data set is. But there is another use case that we want to not forget about here. Like, yeah, packages in your tree is a huge one, but like, how many people are also using these lifecycle scripts within their own packages and projects? Albeit it's much easier for us to tell people to use different scripts, but like, I have actually some repositories of my own where like I use the post install lifecycle script to bootstrap other things in my own repos when I run npm install. And so, and maybe the solution to that is we just say, hey, at the top level, we'll let those scripts go because it's your project. But it's when you start creating these kinds of like edges or like carve outs that a feature becomes really confusing, or it's not as easy to like understand or educate people on how they work. So I just want to like remind folks of that use case. Regarding transitive dependencies, and as folks were mentioning here, I do think that it's important to remember that like, even if we approached every single one of these packages and they all updated their stuff, like, that's great. Deep trees don't upgrade. And you can't get like it's pretty much impossible. And I'm not trying to be like negative about it. And like, we are working on things in npm, and Yarn has it already around like overrides that can help you deal with that. But like, very realistically, making a hard change like this will break things. One piece of research that I was really interested in doing, but like for obvious reasons, as you all may have seen on a blog, I've been busy with other stuff, is what workflows are we breaking? And I think we talked about that a little bit last week, but it's like, if I npm install React, or I install Electron, or a great example that we saw is if we look at that list that you have, one of the top ones in there is Node serial port, which to my understanding is like using the post install script to grab binaries. And like, yeah, they could work on engineering it, but like, we would basically break all historic like embedded systems stuff that's doing anything with Node and serial ports. I think as much as it's useful to kind of like look through the individual dependencies, I think just as useful, and if not more useful, will be like, what are these use cases and what are these ecosystems? I always like to think of the JavaScript ecosystem as an ecosystem of ecosystems. So like, who are the ones that are going to be the most affected by this? And what is like what are ones that are like less likely to update? Who's going to like end up getting caught in this? And the other side, and I just want to remind folks of something we talked about last week, which is, while npm scripts absolutely are a place where malicious code can be put, and it's like the fastest path if you steal a package that you can get some stuff in there, right? Like, it is not foolproof. It is to a certain extent kicking the can down the road. If I want it to be malicious, I can do some static code analysis if I get access to some packages and figure out the code that will run 100% of the time whenever someone runs npm test for a certain package. I do want us to really be careful about going too far down the rabbit hole of like kind of completely getting rid of this really great developer experience that we have, when like the problem that we're really talking about is, again, highly utilized packages that are compromised. And there are a lot of other ways. And obviously we're looking at them. And this is not to say, hey, we shouldn't fix this because there's other ways to fix it. Absolutely not. And I think, Francisco, some of the things in your proposal that you're talking about that give people better tools for protecting themselves, like even if the defaults, for example, are not going to make a huge difference, like giving people the tools they need to protect themselves is also awesome. And I think framing it that way, as you were before, we're like, hey, maybe what we're working on is like better tools for managing scripts, auditing scripts, handling your own repositories, becoming aware when things within your tree change. These are all things that are super awesome. And, we could kind of see where the ecosystem goes with that without having to enforce it. So anyways, lots and lots of words coming out of my mouth. I really like the direction this is going. And thanks for the hard work, everyone.
ZB, I see your hands up, and then Francisco, if you want to go after that.
Okay, thank you. In terms of tools for managing scripts, I started building some. And my conclusion from looking into the topic and trying a few hacks and getting suspended on NPM, sorry, is that you actually want to stop new post-install scripts from showing up. So the first and simplest thing we can do, that's going to be fairly quick to introduce, is to put a note in package lock if your dependency had a post-install script or not. And then if you're installing again, if you're updating stuff, anything, we check back to see if this post-install script is new. And if it is new, we don't run it, we warn or ask or stop the process somehow to let the user check. Because the only popular risk with post-install scripts is someone adding the script to a package that didn't have it before. And we have so very few popular packages with post-install scripts existing already that taking one over would not be as easy as taking over like the majority of other packages and adding a post-install script.
So like a trust on first use style, and then if the post-install script changes, you have to trust it again. And if it didn't have one previously, you have to kind of opt into it. So then it's just a matter of how we store that.
Yep.
Yeah. Francisco, did you want
to? Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, so definitely, I think the idea from the original RFC is to kind of have that feature through the like specific allowing of scripts for specific versions, under the theory that like if a new thing comes out with the new script, it's going to be on a different version. And I think you get the same feature. I guess technically the distinction would be like hashing the script and comparing the script, but like then we get into kind of weird use cases of like, what if that relies on something else? But I guess just big picture, I agree with that. My only kind of, I think, opinion on that matter is that information should exist in the package JSON, if possible, as opposed to package lock, just due to the kind of unfortunate situation we have with GitHub, where by default package locks don't render in PRs because they're always very big. And in my experience, no one reads through them, as opposed to like information in package JSONs, I think do get kind of more eyes on them during the review process. At least my experience, package lock is a bit more kind of intended for a computer to read than a human, and it would be kind of doing double duty. And again, if at least one of my desired goals of this is less about turning things on or off, but precisely to kind of the previous point that's been made here, just surfacing this information, right? Like putting the user in a position to be able to make the right decision. Just the other thing I wanted to re-clarify, I want to, I guess, just validate what Miles is saying here. Like, in my mind, it is a failure case if we break things. And like, I understand that like almost any change will break stuff. The way I like to operate is I want to create, at least at this stage, very early, the bar to meet to be like, can we do this in a way that doesn't break anything? And maybe like after a month of thinking about it, yeah, we agree we can't. And then we fall back to this decision of like, we're going to, for the foreseeable future, just have this be a special mode you turn on or something. But I do like to operate kind of in these early stages under the kind of like almost delusion of like, can we provide the best experience and solve this particular problem without breaking stuff? And what does that look like, right? And I'm willing to believe that it's not possible. I'm curious what happens when we set that restriction on ourselves. And if nothing else, I just want that to kind of relieve anyone's idea that like, you know, our position is to, you know, turn off scripts. That's not our position. Our position is to like ideally kind of like, in a lot of ways, like the thing I think we're all kind of saying we wish we could do is somehow magically say, no more scripts from now on unless you really, really, really need them, right? Like, you know, if we just had some way of codifying that, and perhaps we can get close to that. You know, I saw through the chat some stuff. Like, I definitely think that there are some approaches of like, look, if I see that you have a package lock and it's from before the date where we made this switch and blah, 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 then like, clearly the implication here is that you've already accepted it before. Maybe if you type npm update, then I'm gonna, you know, bring in the new rules or something. But like, I'm certainly like very open to bending over backwards to all the existing user base with the hope that like, and again, and npm has proven itself to be exponential so far. And so like one theory is that there's way more packages left to be published than have been published. And, you know, is it possible to give those yet to be published packages this kind of new universe without like harming the old ones? That's all.
I'm not sure who was first, ZB or two.
I think I was. The one thing I wanted to say to what was brought up about package JSON and including it there, and I see ZB said kind of extended this, or kind of it might be talking about this too. I think I totally agree that package JSON or package lock is not a file that should ever be processed by humans. Like, it's just a huge risk in a lot of ways to rely on people processing that document. I think, you know, the way I would think about that is it is being intended to be processed by a machine, and then that will be you know, the CLI will be the interface in which that gets surfaced to a person. So when, you know, I run npm install, and there would, I guess, need to be some storing of like a decision log basically around this, around what you're allowing, what you're not. But the CLI should be the thing controlling, you know, access, allowing scripts to run based off what's in the package lock, rather than the package lock kind of being something people would reference. And then I suppose you would need a metadata file, either like a property in package JSON, which I guess would be fair, of like which scripts to allow, which to not, which I have a feeling is maybe what ZB already did. But yeah, that there needs to be something outside of, I agree there needs to be something outside. I think that data should probably live in the package lock though.
ZB, did you have anything?
Yeah. So what I meant about package lock is I think the easy thing we can do first is to not get people through any trouble of reviewing any of this. So package lock is the choice, because it's the CLI that needs to store that information and only react to the risky situations and then inform the person. So yes, tampering with it in a PR would be risky, but then tampering with package lock maliciously in a PR and getting it approved is much riskier, even now with existing capabilities, than just this changing that one boolean. So yeah, I still think package lock is better for the initial choice, and package JSON is famously too overloaded with other stuff coming from various things we tend to configure through it. So some people are very opposed to changing it. I don't know if that's something we still care about, but it used to be an argument before.
So just to be mindful of time, we only have about 7 minutes left. I know we're talking a little bit in the weeds here about the actual implementation. It sounds like there's still a lot of work to be done to actually uncover impact, it sounds like. And there's a bit of work that a few folks have agreed to take on. I just want to make sure that I capture that and make sure that it's accurate. Bradley, did you note that you were willing to potentially help uncover or utilize like the Node projects tooling to uncover
whatever data or numbers you want run, but I'll need to know which numbers you want.
Okay, I think that would be important to have just the overall impact of the depth of usage, or let's say like transitive dependencies that are relying on one of these 12,000 packages that have already been uncovered to be using install scripts in some way. But then what might be interesting, and what I think, Francisco, you were getting at, was uncovering, and Miles spoke to this as well, uncovering those use cases of the 12,000 packages. Like, what are they missing today that we could potentially add as a feature set or feature add into the NPM CLI to mitigate the usage of install scripts and provide them a better like paved path that's actually better, facilitates the need that they're right now using this very powerful feature for. I think that's a sec.
The other thing we probably want data-wise is if they're using a Simva range, what could they upgrade on and be upgraded with? So like a minor, I could reasonably see a minor by no longer having scripts. I don't think a patch, but if people are pinned on versions, like Miles said, they're never going to update. They'll never get the update. So we'd need to know like how big of a change we can allow and automatically kind of roll into the transitive depths, which I don't think will be very big. I think it's going to be a patch.
Rebecca, did you have a comment? I'm just trying to read the chat here at the same time.
Oh, I was just mentioning binding zip files are implicitly included. So even if they don't have any scripts entries, if you have a binding zip file, one gets injected. So we need to look for that when counting the number of packages that have scripts, since you can run arbitrary commands via binding zip files.
So that's I think a very important call out. I do have listed, and I'll talk with you, Bradley, offline just to coordinate some of this work. But I do have a list of every single package that has any of the lifecycle scripts, including the zip file as well. And so that list can be used basically to determine this dependency graph and get a full understanding of these transitive dependencies that I can't remember who it was that was asking for that. I think it was Bradley. It was you that was asking for that.
I think there's also potentially a few RFCs that we could potentially, or even just discussions that we can start here that help to start to address potentially at least the platform and OS specific package distributions. Internally, our team actually looked at this and did some exploration into the space roughly 6-7 months ago when Yarn was actually considering a package variance RFC. This is one of the use cases that has come up for post-install scripts in terms of fetching native binaries, and it's not all of the use cases, but it seems to be the one that's most often referenced. And so potentially in the next week or so, we could explore opening up at least PR or RFC in that space to share sort of the initial work and thoughts that our team had as well, which might allude to features that we could add to the CLI that mitigate the need for install scripts. We've only got a couple minutes left, and I apologize to the other two RFCs we had here. Were there any updates to, I guess, 375, Isaac, that you could speak to? I know yourself and Jordan were going to, at some point, sync up and make some work happen there.
Yeah, I will. I'll update with the PR comment. Basically, what we already said kind of earlier in the call regarding NPM copy, I kind of touched on that we're have some idea of kind of what the next step would be to make it a little bit less primitive than its current state.
Cool. Yeah, if there's any way of you two syncing up before next week, I know a lot of folks might be out given the holidays that are coming up here in North America. And apologies, Matt, did you have any update on your side if you've gotten a chance to maybe even sync up with Mike yet or not?
Yeah, no real update for me. I was out of town last weekend, but I should have some time this weekend, especially if, I'm in all the Slack channels now. So if anyone wants to hit me up in your preferred Slack channel to chat about stuff, I'd be super interested, especially to find out if Caleb's version of the RFC makes mine not a thing or vice versa. Yeah.
Maybe that's something you two can sync up on, even if you both get into the same org. I'll invite Caleb to all the 3 channels or 3 Slack orgs that I did for you, Matt.
Cool.
CB, I see your hands up. Did you want to give a comment just before we go?
Just wanted to ask if it makes sense for me to write up a short RFC covering the minimal approach we could take, or if we want to continue discussing it just as an option or precondition to the existing RFC.
I think it might be good to just add it to this. I think that was kind of where Francisco and Peter were eventually leading to having some sort of optional or opt-in mechanism. So I feel like it's very much aligned with your recommendation, and just where that information lives might be the thing that you have differing opinions, but I think most folks on this call, I think we're aligned with lock files, but how we surface that information to the end users is, I think, still up for debate. So maybe if you want to sync up with those folks like Peter, Francisco, if you want to async or sync, talk with ZB, that would be good.
Sure. Yeah, I have your email. I now have your email. I'll send you an email and try to get, and I think I have Bradley's email still. So I'll try to get a group going. Thank you.
No problem. I'm a hobbyist, so I'm not going to be able to catch up with your pace all the time, but want to take part in it.
Thank you so much, everyone. I know we're at time. Appreciate the conversation and continuing to discuss these items into the next week. And ideally, and hopefully, we'll see you next week. Cheers.